Hello there, and welcome to the Savage Balance Podcast. Gonna record. Come on now, I'm recording. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Savage Balance Podcast, a weekly podcast offering a new piece of writing, a meandering ramble, or in this case, the second part of an interview. How are you all? I'm sure you can hear a nice bit of lo-fi growling there from our pooch, Googie. I'm sharing the bed with her currently, and she's glaring out the window at the night sky and getting pretty miffed with any dogs that walk past. But anyway, enough rambling because I've got a lot to say. This is the second part of my conversation with Juliet Gellatley, writer, animal activist, and the founder and director of Viva. If this is the first time you're here, then please go and listen to the first part of this before jumping in here. We continue to discuss zoonotic diseases, factory farming, wildlife markets, antibiotic resistance, COVID-19 pandemics, and veganism. I won't hold you off listening to the second part of this conversation too long, but I will briefly mention that there is a point about midway through where I kind of only half stated a potential fact with a lack of any sort of real conviction. It was in reference to an Earthling Ed podcast, and I've since researched a bit more about what it was that I was intending to say. I've posted a link to it in the show notes, so I'll talk a bit more about it in the outro. But for now, this is episode 4, the second half of my conversation with Juliet Gellatley. A lot of it sounds like you're very much ahead of the curve, which sort of relates back to one of the reasons you're here talking, which was to do with the open letter and stuff. And there's a campaign that you're launching, the 3 in 4 campaign. Could you tell us a bit about what that is?
So going back to that, the 3 in 4, obviously the 3 in 4 means that's the amount of new or emerging infectious diseases that come from animals and jump to people directly due to trading wildlife or to factory farming. So that's why it's called 3 in 4. But it's part of an overarching campaign, which is much bigger, which is called End Factory Farming Before It Ends Us. So it's still Viva's raison d'etre to actually expose factory farming. And we're launching a documentary soon, which took quite some filming, I have to tell you, because it's called Hogwood, a modern horror story. But it's a really interesting story because one of the most common questions that we get asked from the public, so just Joe and Joanna public, when we're out there on the streets, because we do a lot of, you know, when you show people the immersive reality, so they've got the goggles on, so we'll film in 3D. And people just can't get over how cruel factory farming is in Britain. They kind of think it's all somewhere else. And everybody says that can't be legal. And then they say, but who do they supply? So we say the biggest retailer in the UK, Hogwood, was supplying Tesco. But surely they've stopped. At the point we were campaigning, no, they haven't stopped. But they've seen this. Yes, they've seen this. Oh my God, how can Tesco support this? And so the documentary was really to show people how hard it is as campaigners to actually change the powers that be, if you like, how government, how the National Pig Association, the NFU, the retailers, how they all just close round and protect these farmers that are exposed, rather than, you know, hold their hands up and say, yeah, this is just wrong. So Tesco's response was, no, there's no point dropping them as a supplier. What we do is we work with our suppliers to improve them. So we went back in. So this is a pig farm, a mega pig farm, a year later, and very little had changed. So we filmed it again and showed the public the cruelty. Still, Tesco would not, you know, they just wouldn't budge. They dig their heels in. So we did various things, like we did like Viva. We did we did things like we went to some major food awards and we actually presented an award to the Tesco table, and you know that would go out through the media and social media. So we're constantly trying to embarrass Tesco into change, you know, if they won't do it through decency. And they still wouldn't budge. And then, you know what, finally, the reason that they dropped Hogwood was because we left hidden cameras. And what we got on the hidden cameras was just too shocking for them to justify, and it was people hitting the animals. And that's when they thought the PR nightmare from this, because that's the only reason they changed. It's not through decency. And that's what we wanted to get across, you know, that these supermarkets aren't decent in terms of their policy. And so, because people just find it very hard to understand why when we expose something, the whole world doesn't change, you know, immediately. So the 3 and 4 campaign is part of this bigger campaign. But have a look out for the Hogwarts documentary. It's not out yet, but it's going on major platforms like Amazon, Google Play. My brain's gone blank. I can't think of the names of the platforms. What's the other major one?
Is the Netflix?
We don't know if it's going on Netflix yet. We still haven't heard back. What is it? Is Amazon, Google Play? What's the other major one?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not very good at this. Was Sky? Is it a Sky?
Apple Play. That was the other one I was going to say. Yeah, it's going out on all of those. But yeah. Anyway, so 3 and 4, we are trying to basically highlight the fact that so many of these diseases come from the way that we exploit animals. So the answer is yes, governments have to change, but really we have to change ourselves first and foremost and take that responsibility. And so it gives people, if people go to viva.org.uk/3 and 4, there's loads of information about actual zoonotic diseases, because I think it's interesting. It's not just things like coronavirus. It's things, and not just the bird flus that I've been talking about. HIV-1 and HIV-2 came from animals, from consuming chimpanzees and monkeys. Ebola came from consuming wild animals. I don't know if people are aware that measles came from sheep and cattle, from when we farmed sheep and cattle, and it's killed hundreds of millions of people. Leprosy came from water buffalo when we started to try and exploit them. It's not an unusual thing for these pandemics or new diseases to emerge, and we wanted to highlight why they're emerging. And what virologists are saying is that they're emerging with ever more frequency, and so it's something that we need to address. The only way I think we can address it is by just not trading in animals and not eating them. And as you know, there are many benefits to this, because somebody said to me the other day, they said, well, a vaccine might be created and people might just be waiting for that. And I said, yeah, and there might never be a vaccine as well. Vaccine's a whole other issue, but, the virus will mutate, because that's what viruses do. And even if a vaccine worked, that's just that one. That just means we're still at those crossroads where if we continue down the road that we're going, there will be another pandemic. So we're back in the same situation. So that's it, but whereas we have the choice of going vegan en masse and actually really changing things, and the advantages of that, or that we won't have another pandemic, because we don't get viruses from carrots and broccoli, and we don't get Dutch elm disease, we don't get tobacco mosaic virus, because viruses in plants can't cross to animals like that. So we'd have all those advantages, plus we'd stop destroying wildlife habitats to the extent that we do, because the main driver is animal agriculture. Plus we'd stop being cruel to animals en masse, and that has to be surely something that we all care about. And our own health, other diseases, heart disease would lessen, strokes, cancers. So every which way that you look, it's such a massive advantage to go vegan. You really wonder what is the sticking point here. Can you imagine if you were an alien looking down at what we're doing to the planet now and this coronavirus, and you've got us like talking here, about a solution that everybody has the power to control, and they'll be thinking, what's the problem? Why isn't everybody going vegan? It does seem, when you try and look at it objectively, it just seems we are a strange species, aren't we? Why don't we jump for the solution?
Yeah, all these hierarchical systems that keep us. When you were talking about the powers and stuff, it reminded me of Melanie Joy and her work, and coining the term carnism, and thinking about how much power, how much money, how much effort is sort of used to perpetuate this sort of, and protect that invisible belief system that it is just normal, and that it's sort of almost unquestionable for a lot of people. And even when you were talking about the amount of things, there's a great podcast from Earthling Ed, his Disclosure podcast, where he was talking to Dr. Michael Greger, and they were talking about the pace, the amount in which new ones are discovered, it's almost, I can't remember, but it's sort of daily or weekly. Is that right? Do you know that at all? The pace in which these new strains get discovered.
I don't know that. I haven't heard that as being a weekly event, I have to say. I will look into that.
Okay, well, maybe I've got it wrong. I don't know. maybe but it was. I remember hearing what they were talking about and thinking it sounded kind of shocking how fast these things would happen.
Well, the flu virus is particularly adept at mutating. It's what it does. And we all know that from the flu vaccines, you know, that they only partially work because they've already changed within a season. And that is, you know, for example, in the 50s, there was a major pandemic which killed over 1 million people, and that was the flu virus. And that was H3N2. And the next one, in the next decade across Asia, it killed another million, but it had mutated into H3N2. So the reason it could kill people was because of those mutations. People didn't have enough immunity, even though it'd come from the same source. So they are very adept at changing themselves, and we've given them the conditions to do so on a plate through creating factory farming. So we've really created this nightmare scenario where we're allowing viruses and bacteria to just mutate at an ever increasing rate, and this new strains coming out, like you say, left, right, and centre, that the authorities, you know, just can't keep on top of, and they literally are. The WHO are just waiting for the next pandemic and the next pandemic. And so one, you know, good thing through this crisis is that I've heard scientists speaking out on a scale that I've never heard before, because scientists can be incredibly disappointing in terms of them, you know, using their knowledge to actually speak out against something. But a lot of wildlife biologists and virologists are actually saying we have to stop factory farming animals. We have to stop the trade in wildlife. You know, the world's governments actually have to play a role now in not just protecting industry, but actually protecting us.
Yes, they have to provide that role for us. I'm just conscious that I've gone over the allotted time that I said.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Call it a day whenever you like.
Oh, that's great.
I'm okay. I'm not under pressure, but yeah, I mean, we don't want to bore people's pants off, do we?
I'm fascinated. I'm finding this interesting. I could go on for forever, unfortunately, time permitting with things. But there was a couple of things I definitely did want to ask you, which was just first of all, how you personally are coping and being affected by COVID-19, and how that's affecting Viva's day-to-day running and support as well.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for any organisation, certainly a charity that relies on public donations, because at the moment, I think, or let's put it this way, in the first 2 months, I think people were spending quite a lot on online buying, and so we managed to keep our shop going, for example, and a lot of people were buying the confectionery and the wine. But I think as time goes by, it's starting to hit that a lot of people are not going to have jobs to go back to, even though they're being furloughed. And the fallout for industries like the tourism trade, which of course is huge globally, the tourist trade, and everything around it, the entertainment trade, you know, you just think about local pubs and restaurants. I just don't know how they're going to get back on their feet, because so many people, I mean, there's going to be a proportion that are just like, oh, you know, let's just go back, go for it, especially young people, of course. But there's going to be a substantial amount of the population who are just too scared to go to those kind of places. And they certainly won't want to be, jostling at a bar for a drink. So I think there's a lot of damage that this is going to do in terms of people's livelihoods. And so coming back to Viva, that matters, because what's the first thing people drop is donations to charities, of course. I am concerned, because we can't fulfill any of our objectives without money to pay for that. We can't campaign anything. So obviously there are always concerns from a charitable perspective. On a personal perspective, I've been absolutely fine, thank you. I am. I've got people are in very different situations, and I've got my 2 teenage sons here who keep you very level-headed. And I think teenagers have probably coped with it extremely well, because it was almost like they were already geared up to it, because they're so used to doing things like games remotely with all their mates. Do you know what I mean? and all, they're all very used to talking to each other through those kind of means. Sort of on a business level, of course, we use Zoom and Skype and the rest of it, but they've been using FaceTime and whatever for years. So I think they've coped very well, and they've also injected a lot of humour into the household. They kind of laugh at everything, and that's one of the ways I've coped with it, actually. Sort of been by being very daft at times, I have to say.
Yeah, humor's vital. Humor's so necessary. It's you don't, because otherwise you can easily get massively overwhelmed and just get sort of crushed by, especially the amount of information that can come through and the various degrees in which you can come through, and the fact that it's not just personal but global. It affects almost anything that human beings do, so you can't avoid it. So being able to have some humor in the house, have some people to laugh along with.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I think we might have gone to a level where it's going too far. I think we're thinking how to prank each other a bit too much now. But yeah, I think you can become overwhelmed, partly because the media is, not really talking about very much else, and some of the images that were coming out, I suppose, especially in the first 2 months. Particularly of health systems that were being overwhelmed in places like New York and Italy. It was very scary at that point because we didn't know whether our NHS was going to be overwhelmed. I think people are calming down a bit now because that didn't happen. The worst scenarios didn't happen. But I think a lot of people, you have to remember that a lot of people are living on their own, and I think that would be a challenge in itself, wouldn't it, through times like this. You kind of take for granted, I suppose, that when you've got a close family with people that you love, it's a very, very different situation, I think. People have had to, people who are in love, who haven't been able to see their partners, major challenges like that. People who haven't been able to see the grandmas and granddads. I know that has upset a lot of people. And also, I think the other really upsetting thing, which, happened to somebody that I know very well, was not being able to see their parents, because at the beginning there was this like you cannot come into a hospital or you cannot go into a care home. I think that has been incredibly tragic, where people have died on their own without somebody they love by their side. I think that's so cruel.
Yes, yeah, it really is having such a wide proportion of different impacts on different people's lives, and yeah, there's a definite cruelty to all of this, that's for sure. A couple more things I was thinking about there when you were talking is one, I feel like I'm not sure how much of this pandemic, the reason why it's so impactful compared to other ones that exist that maybe have higher death rates, is not just the amount of spread and how it's spread across the world, but also it's one of the only ones that's really affected the economic effect of almost everything, really. That's the thing that's been challenged first and foremost, sort of more heavily on, really. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts about that. And also, do you have much hope for the future? Do you have much hope for veganism from this, and hope in general for people?
Going back to why it's spread, because pandemics are caused by novel viruses or new viruses where you don't have any immunity to it. So nobody in the world had immunity to this particular strain of coronavirus. The reason that it spread, for example, more than, say, MERS, the Middle Eastern version of the coronavirus, which went from camels, is largely because it only really infected people directly from camels. There was very, very little person-to-person spread because the virus hadn't mutated to be that contagious. So that's why, although it's more deadly, it kills more people than it infects, it hadn't mutated to be able to spread person to person. The reason with SARS, that did mutate so that the virus was able to spread more effectively human to human, but you showed the symptoms much more quickly when you got the virus, so they could contain it very, very quickly. Now, coronavirus it's this particular virus mutated so that it was contagious, so it could spread relatively easy from person to person, but also you don't get symptoms straight away, and some people are what's called asymptomatic, i.e. they don't really show any symptoms at all. Some people, especially the young, if they did show symptoms, they would be mild, so they weren't even sure that they'd got this virus, so they certainly wouldn't be tested. And so for those different reasons, coronavirus has been able to spread through populations across the whole world with relative ease. So that's why there are those differences. In terms of whether I feel hope, yes, I think the human race is capable of amazing things. We're an ingenious sort of species. We've got a very large brain with a lot of capacity for ingenuity and positivity and creating solutions. It's with veganism, what we've got to sort of untangle is the amount of propaganda that is spewed out from meat and drug and dairy and fish industries and so forth, because you have to remember that we're up against industries that are some of the biggest on the entire globe, and so that the pressure that they're putting on politicians, you have like this revolving door situation where they're just patting each other on the back and making each other promises. And the reason I said the drug industry is simply because when you think about it, let's take the United States, it's one of the biggest nations on the planet. 80% of antibiotics go to farmed animals, not to human beings. And a lot of people have no idea that that's the case. So that the power of the drug industry, they want factory farming to continue because that's where their profit base lies. And you have to remember that when you have billions of animals on the planet, they have to be fed. So they're either grazed directly in the case of some beef cattle and some dairy, etc. Or you factory farm them and you're growing fodder and then feeding that in usually pelleted form. But to do that, you have to use loads and loads and loads of land, and those land usually goes to what's called a monoculture. So you're growing the same crop over and over and over again. And who benefits from that? Well, the drug industry, because they're the ones that are supplying the pesticides and the fertilizers. So they do not want us to go to a kinder way of farming Mother Earth. Now, I'm just saying all that because that's what we're up against. Having said all that, I think we're capable of very quick change. And I think what will happen is that we will come to a point where there's enough people and enough momentum for industry not to be able to hold us back, and the governments will see that there's no other way forward, because if they continue on the road that we're down, they know it's their kids' lives, their grandchildren's lives. They know that we're putting at risk the future of the entire human race, and that's no exaggeration. I'm not being over dramatic and Shakespearean. It's just the truth. And this has kind of brought that to the fore. So I think we'll reach that cliche, the tipping point. But I really did think that we will, and we will be unstoppable as human society together. And we, the so-called ordinary individuals, it'll be us that forge change, and systems. Some systems will collapse in the way that things are set up, and I think what we'll do is we'll come down to much more local community, being more local community led, more local community driven, and the governments will let's say command, if that's the right word, lead, that's a better word, smaller areas, much smaller areas, and we will change beyond sort of recognition of the way that we've been for the last. It's not even that long a history that we've set out the way that we are. We'll go back to be much smaller communities, but we'll have technology still. There will still be things that make us different from our medieval ancestors. We'll have the roll-up laptop screens and all the rest of it. But I think we will accept that compassion, empathy, caring for Mother Earth and all the species are things that we should be proud of and are central to the way that we live.
That's fantastic. I share your hope and optimism, and also have really appreciated all of the things that I've learned during this. I feel like I've learned so much through talking to you, and some things that I had thought maybe being challenged as well, which is great. That's fantastic. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and talk to us and to share all this information. Where can people go to find out more information?
So the main website is Viva, so viva.org.uk. The 3 in 4 campaign is that viva.org.uk/3 in 4. And then the recipe club I mentioned, which is really good, so have a little look at that. That's veganrecepiclub.org.uk, or it's an app on your phone, and it's all free. Everything's free. And also, if you're interested in the health and nutrition side, for whatever reason, there's loads of information on vivahealth.org.uk as well, so it's all there for you.
Sounds like anyone who's interested in any of the stuff we've talked about, really, you've got it covered some way or another.
Yes, that's right. And in fact, there's another webpage, maybe I should mention in all this, apart from the 3 and 4, there's an FAQ on viva.org.uk/coronavirus. So hopefully we have got it all covered.
It sounds like it. It does sound like it. Thank you very much for your time, for your wisdom, for your great words. It's been a pleasure being in your company, and I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, I've enjoyed it too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Cheers. There we go. What did you think of that? Thank you very much for listening. What a phenomenal human being Juliet is. I learned so much, and I think the work that she and Viva do is of such high importance and high value, especially in this time in our sort of the world that we live in at the moment. There is a link to Viva's website in the show notes, and I encourage you to go and have a look through that, as well as a report conducted by Viva, by Dr. Justine Butler on Viva's website called Zoonoses, A Ticking Time Bomb, which goes into a lot more detail about the links between animal agriculture and zoonotic diseases. Well, not just animal agriculture, but animal farming and in general the way that animals are used for an economic purpose. That's dense, full of information, so do go check that out. There's also a link to that Disclosure podcast, Earthling Ed talking to Dr. Michael Greger, MD, about pandemics, which I misquoted in the episode. But essentially what I was trying to say was that Earthling Ed said he was researching swine and avian flus at the height of the pandemic and saw that new strains were being discovered all the time. I thoroughly recommend people listen to that whole podcast, as it's really dense with subject matter related to this conversation and is just a really fascinating and intriguing conversation, really. There's a link to that, as well as a talk from Juliet about an investigative documentary Viva did called Hogwood, and a piece I wrote about my experience of this interview on my website, www.savbalance.com. If you could please share this podcast with your friends, either in person or on social medias. We have an Instagram, Savage Balance Podcast, and Twitter, we are SavBalPod. There's an email address if you want to talk to me more directly. That is savbalpod@gmail.com. Please subscribe, comment, rate, and review. The artwork is by Dolly Gray. The music is by Danny Tonks. Thank you once again for Juliet Gellatley for being such a wonderful person and interesting to talk to. Do go and check her out all over the internet. And until we potentially meet again, please be kind to yourself during this time and take care.